Nothing about the Last Supper was last minute. Hours before his betrayal, Jesus calmly orchestrated everything. We're examining Mark 14:12-16. Let's read verse 12 from the ESV. And on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, "Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" So far in chapter 14, we've been told of the chief priests and scribes plotting to kill Jesus, of a woman pouring out a rich act of adoration in preparation for Jesus' death, and of Judas meeting with the priests and scribes to arrange the betrayal of Jesus. Now, verse 12 speaks of the beginning of two important religious celebrations: the Passover, which commemorates the 10th plague, and God's protection from it for everyone whose house was marked with the blood of a lamb. The angel of death passed over the marked houses. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is a week-long commemoration of the flight from slavery in Egypt to freedom. The two celebrations began concurrently and were treated as a whole. To see the origins of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, read Exodus chapter 12. So the context for Mark 14:12 is the Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread, feasts of obligation that all Jewish people are required to observe. Naturally, the disciples of Jesus would ask their master where he intended to eat the Passover. The fact that he and they would eat the Passover meal, and that there were preparations to make, was assumed. The only unresolved issue was location. Did Jesus have a plan? Look at verse 13. And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him." Jesus sent two disciples into the city of Jerusalem. We know from our previous studies in Mark that Jesus and the disciples have spent their days in Jerusalem and their nights in Bethany. Now he sent two disciples into the city. Which two? Mark doesn't tell us. According to Luke's account, it was Peter and John, but Mark doesn't seem to think the identity of the two disciples is of any importance. Jesus tells them, "Go to the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you." There is a lot going on here. First, carrying water was traditionally work carried out by women. But the majority of Jews in the world are gathered in and around Jerusalem for Passover. The demands of the preparations are overwhelming, and it's an all-hands-on-deck situation. Nevertheless, a man carrying water stands out. Second, Jesus tells them that this man would meet them, not that they would meet him. So what? What's the difference? The man in question would approach them. Unlike when appropriating the donkey colt for the triumphal entry into Jerusalem at the beginning of the week, the disciples aren't the initiators here. Would the man carrying water know and recognize them? Is he on the lookout for them? Mark doesn't tell us. What we know is that the man would meet them, and they are to follow that man. Look at verse 14. And wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, "Where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?" Follow him wherever he goes, and enter the household he enters. Then speak to the master of the house. Master of the house is an interesting term. The Greek word is oikodespote, literally, the despot of the house. This is a title for a manager of a boarding house or an inn. Because so many people have come from a distance, dining rooms have to be available for travelers. The disciples are most likely going into a large building with many rooms and a communal kitchen, and will speak to the manager of that facility. And just like with that donkey colt, Jesus has dictated the conversation, at least the disciples' part, in advance. Look carefully at the question they are to ask. Where is my guest room? Not, do you have a free guest room? Or, can I get a guest room? But, where is my guest room? Linguistically, the phrase, my guest room, sounds like a prearranged, reserved room, and not a last-minute day of the feast plea. The message from Jesus to the house manager is essentially, show my disciples the room you have reserved for us to eat the Passover meal. Look at verse 15. And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready. They're prepare for us. Jesus tells them to expect a large room. That's good, because it will need to accommodate at least 13 people. And it's an upper room. It was common for large, unrelated groups of people to gather on the first level, with private rooms on the upper levels. They should expect a large, private room, furnished for the service of the Passover meal, and they should make the necessary preparations to celebrate Passover there. It should be no surprise that the space is organized and furnished for Passover dining. Everyone in and around Jerusalem will be eating a Passover meal, and every available space will be in use. On to verse 16. And the disciples set out, and went to the city, and found it just as he had told them. And they prepared the Passover. And everything was as Jesus said it would be, and they prepared for Passover as he instructed. When we studied the triumphal entry, we saw Jesus describe what the disciples would find when they went through a gate into the city: a waiting donkey colt, and some people who were rightly concerned about its appropriation. This story has some similarities, but some significant differences. Does the Passover preparation story describe a prophetic pronouncement, like the donkey colt story? Or did Jesus have a prearranged place for the very important Passover celebration? It would be almost unfathomable for a large group of out-of-towners, like Jesus and the 12, to not have a plan for Passover. These Jewish men are obligated to celebrate Passover. It is a religious and cultural failure, even a sin, not to have prepared to celebrate Passover. Also, the man carrying water was to meet the two disciples, as though he was to look out for these close associates of the famous Jesus. With the donkey colt story, the people were taken aback by the disciples taking it, and they had to be assured that it would be quickly returned. But not only was the housemaster not surprised by this late inquiry, but he also had a large private room arranged in advance for Jesus and his men to celebrate the feast. So, why am I trying to minimize the predictive aspect of this story? Because Jesus did all things in a right and righteous manner. Mark's account tells us that he knew he was on his way to the cross. He knew this was his final Passover. He knew he had a limited opportunity to prepare his disciples. So, I am suggesting, and I believe the text we just examined bears out, that Jesus had a plan for this Passover just as surely as he had a plan to go to Jerusalem, be betrayed, be mistreated, be crucified, and in 3 days to rise again. And making a reservation in no way undermines that plan. It ensures it proceeds smoothly. Next time, Jesus' final Passover. Thanks for studying with me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.